So as a bit of a background, so I'm Julianne Averill. I'm a CFO who focuses on tech bio as well as companies that are at this intersection of, I'd say, healthcare and IT. And then by way of training, I also spent a lot of time actually working on getting my background and expertise in data science. And so about like 6 or 7 years ago, I started trying to figure out what is all this thing that was called basically AI, which we'll go into today and now has become Gen AI, but it was everything from machine learning to data science to information systems to now basically this whole bucket of stuff that we call artificial intelligence. So today we're going to have an interactive discussion. So really, as you think of questions as they come up, put them in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand and call it out. Lucas and Charlotte will be helping with questions. And then also, just so everybody knows, because even though we're talking about AI, of course, internets can't always help out. So I'm actually on my hotspot. So if my internet goes out, then Charlotte will go ahead and pull up our deck and we'll go from there. But we'll go ahead and kick off and get started. Okay, so first of all, can everybody see my screen? Cool. So what we're going to talk about today, because I'm sure at this point everybody's kind of heard about AI, and in particular, what does Gen AI have to do with finance? So we're kind of at this point, which is really, I'd say, a tipping point in what is called Gen AI, where we have things such as agents, we have things such as AI revolutionizing and transforming our business model. And we're also thinking about how can AI really maximize our value as CFOs. And so we're going to talk through today about how do we understand which finance functions are seeing the biggest impact from AI? How do we avoid one-size-fits-all solutions? What is AI's impact on our workforce and our talent strategy? We're going to talk about some of the good aspects of AI to some of the not so great, like basically what happens when we see these hallucinations and when it hiccups and tells us things such as, okay, it gave us an Excel model, but that Excel model may be broken. We're going to talk about AI adoption. So if you want to actually roll out an AI implementation in your business, what does that look like? And then we're going to talk about certain things like how do you get training? How do we look at accuracy and compliance? And how do we actually implement that as well? So I guess to start, one of the things I like to understand is where are we at from an AI adoption and just kind of where the audience is in their AI evolution. So Charlotte's going to help us out with doing a poll of the audience. And so the first poll is really want to understand how does everybody feel about this concept of AI and our impact on our jobs? So are you guys seeing, is your team, because we keep hearing about AI is going to take our jobs or people with AI may take our jobs, but is your team worried about that AI will ultimately take our jobs? And so just go ahead and answer yes or no. Okay, well, that's good. So most of us aren't worried about that, or their teams aren't worried about that. And so can anybody share like why or why not?
Well, I would say AI is not always accurate, and you always have to bring it into context. And it's like garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. And you highlighted two good points, which we'll get into today, which is the garbage in, garbage out is one of the things that we're finding with finance is even though we have AI going, we're still trying to figure out how do we manage the data piece. And if the data is not good, the AI result is not good. And from that perspective, that's been what's challenging with AI implementations for finance individuals. And then the second piece as well is really understanding how and when and where does basically what they call human in the loop has also been a bit of a challenge. And especially with finance, AI is really helping us at this point, which we'll go into some of these use cases, but there still is very much an impact for AI to help us as opposed to like, okay, it's not really going to truly fully replace CFOs or any finance individuals anytime soon. Okay, anybody else?
I would say it can handle the strategic decisions. Like it may help us speed up on the data, sorting through our data and putting it in different formats with one. But on the strategic side and the analytical side, I don't see it replacing the accountants, just helping us be more efficient.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So it does help us be more efficient, and we'll actually go through some examples of how it can be strategic. So like there is opportunities of it won't replace us on the strategy side, but it can help us as good thought partners from that perspective too. But that's a good point as well. And then anybody else?
I do think that there is a concern when we think about entry level folks. How,
Mhm.
if AI can replace a lot of that stuff we all learned when we were entry level, if they replace that, how do people start getting that baseline skill set that they build upon and build upon as they progress through their career?
Yeah, and that's a good point as well, because that's what we're seeing is AI is helping, especially older workers, or not older workers, but more experienced workers who've been in the space for a while and have that expertise to see, okay, is AI doing what it needs to do? Or is it basically giving us a bunch of junk? But individuals coming straight out of school, they may be using AI and taking it straight at face value and not seeing it from that perspective. Um, so then our second question for the audience is, do we think the concept of Gen AI for finance is in a hype cycle right now? And by hype cycle, I mean, do we think it's basically a bunch of junk and within 6 months, it's all going to go away and we're all going to be doing something else? And so, Charlotte, can you pull up the poll on this? I'll give everybody a few minutes to answer. I'll go ahead and reshare the screen too, so we fix this. Okay, Charlotte, do you want to show the results? Oh, great. Okay, so we don't think it's in a hype cycle. So anybody want to explain why or why not?
One
Well,
of the
I'm
things,
not,
go ahead.
go.
Oh, I was going to say one of the things we're using it for is, a lot of the algorithmic processing and the data analytics that takes a bulk of where we would spend our time. So I can run it through, get very quick ratios, stuff like that. It's very great for, machine learning and programming. It not just efficient. I mean, it really just compiles everything for me very, very rapidly, and then gives me new ideas and new insights as to where we may want to pursue other opportunities while I can still balance the risk of everything else I had to do previously. So it's a tool. I think we said it earlier in the sidebar, but it's not hype. I think it's still in this development stage, and everyone's implementing it so we can stay ahead of that power curve.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. And especially when you mentioned the coding side of the house, like one of the tools that we're seeing get a lot of use right now is Claude, which is the Anthropic's tool. And that is actually becoming the leader in how do you use this for coding. And then does somebody else have a comment as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure about Gen AI. I'm using ChatGPT, and it's a godsend taking PDF documents and Word documents and
Mhm.
formatting them into Excel spreadsheets with columns and other things where it's saving me time not having to do it manually in Excel.
Exactly. And you know what, that kind of teed up the next part of the presentation, but that's one of the things we're seeing is a lot of productivity around this. And actually what a lot of tech experts are saying is that we are at the beginning of probably about a 10-year cycle with the next wave of AI. Because where we had with AI is we had machine learning, which was basically, okay, here's how does it learn iteratively? And then we had our typical like AI, which even something as simple as like linear regression could be considered AI, but that for all of us is more like, okay, here's a mathematical formula. And now where we are today is we're in this wave of what is ChatGPT, which is basically what everyone's calling Gen AI. And Gen AI is generative AI. So it's a technology where what it does is it uses an algorithm which it's a subset of what's called natural language processing. And so it does, behind the scenes, is doing word matching. And so it's really focused on text and even some images or other media. But what it does is it takes unstructured data and then it produces a result. And it came up about early 2000s based on a paper by Google. And then since then, we've had multiple iterations and multiple models with everything from OpenAI was the original with ChatGPT, but now we have models such as Anthropic's Cloud, as I mentioned. We have Grok, which is xAI or Tesla's model or Musk model. And then we have Perplexity, which is a search tool. And then we even have one coming out of China, which is DeepSeek's model. So we have quite a few different what are called large language models that can really help us think through how do we have this innovative technology and problem solving. And so how does this all apply to finance? Well, as we started to talk about, it's really helping us think through how are we working through complex financial analysis, forecasting, and reporting is some of the initial use cases. But then as we'll get into in a few minutes, we're finding, especially as these models iterate rapidly and even more rapidly, and sometimes as much as I've seen like 1 or 2 different iterations almost per month, we're starting to see different and new unique cases of how it can help us transform the role of the CFO and the role of the finance function, which is everything from the transactional all the way to more of the strategic. And so with Gen AI, one of the things we like to think about it, or how we like to refer to it as, is it's now in a stage of it's more beyond just, okay, it's not necessarily a tech tool, but the way to think about it is it's almost like a business partner. So it can be like your new MBA intern or even your new chief of staff. So as we've talked about, it can help out with your FP&A support. So it can analyze your historical data, your marketing trends. It can generate financial forecasts. In fact, there's a tool that just came out this past week with OpenAI. It's what are they calling agents, where it can actually analyze and prepare budgets on its own. But then beyond that, we have our historical transaction processing. So what used to be robotic process automation has now been streamlined, so it can process your AR, AP. But then we have tools such as fraud detection, so it can help out with compliance, monitoring financial transactions. It can help out with enhanced external reporting. So thinking through everything from how to do technical accounting analysis to really helping out with your month-end close. And then we also have tools that are really around risk management. So thinking through, okay, if we have a large subset of data, we're actually seeing this with a lot of the audit firms, like the Big Four in particular, really focused on this. How do you use AI to, for example, analyze journal entries or analyze large volumes of transaction to figure out what are those risks within the financials that we should really focus on? So really, when we think about what's going on this year, what we're finding is as we're using the LLMs and we're thinking through what do we do with Gen AI, we're moving beyond just, okay, let's use these as one-off use cases to how do we implement them in our workflows. And so what's coming out of that is there's new and different trends where everybody's learning everything from how do we actually get the data to the LLMs. So for example, there's now a concept of AI ready data, which is we've learned that the LLMs work once the data is set up, and it's, even though it can be unstructured, so it can pull data from multiple sources. So from like example, your CRM, so from Salesforce, it can connect it with your ERPs such as NetSuite, and it can help you analyze that data and see how does your sales predict your basically your revenue. But in order to do all that, you need to have scrubbing and you need to have your data clean before it actually goes into the tool. And then the other thing beyond that, what we're starting to see now as well is a movement into physical AI. And by that, we mean AI that is beyond just like your ChatGPT. So it's moving into like, for example, robotics, as well as how do we start to scan and bring in data from like sensors. So for example, the sensors that you use within manufacturing, and how do we think through what does all that AI data look like and how do we get it in a state that's useful for analysis. The other thing that's come up now, which we'll go into in a second, is around how do we manage all of this AI talent, and how do we train people to actually understand AI? So we have this interesting dichotomy where we have AI experts being hired and being paid astronomical sums of money coming out of Silicon Valley, but then in other areas with other companies, we have companies that are laying off roles or restructuring their teams as they figure out how to build an AI-ready workforce. Then the other thing that's come up this year is we've moved beyond. Has anybody heard of the term agents before? Yeah, so agents are now moving beyond just like one agent doing something like ordering travel plans to now there's multi-agents that can actually build your entire system. So for example, we have an intersection right now with Coinbase, which is the company that builds out the crypto platform. They're figuring out how do they use agents to actually help out with currency management. So there's certain different ways to figure out how do you manage agents within a multi-use system as well. So one of the things to think about as we move beyond, okay, the window that we typically see with OpenAI, and we move into what's really actually you keep hearing about is like these agentic workflows. So for example, what Salesforce version of it is called Agentforce, or for example, the one that just came out with ChatGPT, which is their agents, is what is the difference between those and why aren't they the same? So one of the things like we'll show today is I'll show you what does Gen AI look like. So like what's your typical thing that we use, and the difference with Gen AI versus agents is agents usually require user prompts. So basically we're all in the driver's seat. With the agentic AI, the AI is actually in the driver's seat itself. So where we saw this initial use case was around like, for example, coding. So there was a concept of what they call vibe coding, where the agents can go out and code basically applications for us. And then we're starting to see it with Salesforce, where they're using it a lot for customer service. And then in finance, we're seeing it a little bit more on the transaction processing side. And now with OpenAI, they've recently released it to help out with budgeting tools and all that, but it's very early stage. So that's kind of the difference between those two. And then back to the acqui-hires, what's coming up as well is now we're starting to see basically companies figure out, okay, how do they actually help manage these hires and these AI talent? And so recently we just had this acquisition around Windsurf. And so there was 3 deals that occurred with Windsurf in less than 1 week. So they had a potential $3 billion deal with OpenAI. And then that fell apart because of the OpenAI license with Microsoft on the back end. So the company was trying to figure out, okay, what do they do next? So ultimately what happened with that organization was Google came in, paid them a $2.4 billion for a license deal, hired the CEOs and the senior hires. And so that was an interesting deal because it got around the typical like merger type structures and the antitrust rules. But what it actually did was it kind of split the company apart. So you had the CEO and the senior hires go away, but the rest of the company was kind of left. And so they're trying to figure out, okay, what do they do next? Well, then, not even a few days later, Cognition, another AI company, actually acquired the full company, and then 100% of the employees will participate financially in that deal. But basically what we're starting to see now is with these AI companies and mergers is they're starting to go very fast. And there's a huge pull within the space to find AI talent that can help build the next wave of innovation. And what this means kind of for all of us from a finance perspective is AI talent's getting more expensive. And then it looks like basically one of the things too is how do you train the rest of your team to really understand, number one, either the data behind it or how to actually use AI as well. Because we're probably going to see several more of these type of deals as we go on, because we're seeing a lot with, for example, Meta right now is very much actively trying to hire AI engineers as well. And then one of the newer trends for finance is in addition to ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, basically all the different large language models, as we talked about this garbage in, garbage out concept, or concept of hallucinations, one of the things we need to strive for as finance people is accuracy. And so in order to achieve that, what we're starting to see is actually a reversion back to almost older AI. And what I mean by that is more of that data lake model, more of that closed loop model with data management. And so we're getting to a point where we're starting to see an emergence of and a trend towards smaller, what they call smaller language models. And so what you see here is an example of different models that are related to specific use cases within finance that are all specific applications. So the first one is MacroX. And MacroX is an interesting AI in that what it does is it predicts the economy and predicts economic indicators and potential stock prices and movements before it occurs. And so, for example, it predicted the change in the market after our new president took office back in January. So that's what it does. And so it kind of analyzes behavioral sentiment and behavioral economics based on sourcing data and sourcing news media. Then we have another LLM, or small language model, that's trying to solve the problem of ChatGPT and Grok and everybody have been focused on words, but Harmonic's a company where they said, well, what if we focus on math? And how do we focus on helping out for computer science and finance? And so they just recently closed a Series B, and they have an algorithm that's really focused on helping out with finance and helping out with ensuring that you have better mathematical models. Then we have NVIDIA, which has actually, interestingly enough, they have consumer success digital twins. And so that's what you see up here. And those are being used to really help make individuals comfortable in telemedicine, as also in sales. And so you can, like, when you log on, for example, for a patient visit or a customer success visit, you can have a conversation with an individual who can really interact with you, who knows, for example, with the telemedicine side, they may know your background, they may be linked into the EHR, it's completely HIPAA compliant, but you also feel more comfortable because you're interacting with an individual. So those are still early stage, but it's a more condensed and combined platform as well. And then one of the more interesting and newest growing, and then Dennis said we're using digital twins in aerospace production. One of the more interesting AIs that has come out recently, and this one actually transferred, the founder was originally a fintech founder. So his previous company was bought by Bloomberg, but now he's building one in the digital health space. The company is called Open Evidence. And what Open Evidence was they realized, for example, one of the use cases with ChatGPT was originally like, people would look at it for, or doctors would look at it for, like, okay, if I need to understand a really unique medical proposition, how do I figure that out? Well, what Open Evidence did was they realized, okay, we don't need hallucinations when it comes to taking care of our patients. And so they created a closed loop system, and they've been building this, I think, for about like 5 to 10 years. And they partnered with everyone from like Harvard to the New England Journal of Medicine. And they have a very robust data set of basically every single kind of disease you can think of. And by doing that, what they do, and they also offer this free to any doctors or any medical providers, they have built a large language model that's medical specific. And they're finding that, like, for example, it was the first AI to score above on a 90% US medical licensing exam. And so what that's doing is it's enabling doctors to help figure out better care. And it's actually just recently became one of the fastest growing digital health apps of all time. And then this other one down here is actually Perplexity's finance tool. And that one is a free tool that any of us can go and plug into. And it aggregates anything across the internet around finance and around, like, if you want to know a stock price, it'll give you that information on it too. So there's a lot coming out right now around specific tools. So then, okay, we have all these tools now. They're really interesting. They have different levels of data. They have amazing info. They can help us out. Some of them think they can basically promise us the world. So how do we actually implement them? So some of the things that we're finding as best practices, and this is for teams that have implemented from anything from like a small business all the way to a large enterprise is you want to think about it from an implementation perspective, similar to number one, like any tech implementation, but more importantly, like any, I'd say, digital transformation or organizational transformation. So you can, the best practice is everyone's finding, okay, start small. So if you have no AI in your company whatsoever, you can figure out what are those key finance tasks, like what are you putting off? So a good use case is like we talked about at the beginning. And then yes, we will be sharing the presentation afterwards. Sorry. It's like, let's say we do a lot of high volume transactions for AR. And that's something where it's like, okay, we always have to call our customers and chase them. Actually, that's one thing I'm dealing with clients right now. That's something that's actually perfect for AI because there's AI agents that can help with that on the more robust side. But even on the simple side, if you have QuickBooks right now, QuickBooks can generate like reminders that'll remind you and or actually will ping your customer. That one's a little bit, you have to add parameters around it. But that's something simple that you can implement within your current operations. Then the other thing is like, once you figure out, okay, what you're putting off, the best practice is to then go map your process. So based on your process map, like what are those tools that you could use? So kind of like what makes sense and what's like fit for purpose, like could help you. Like, is it an area that you think AI could help? Or is it something where like, okay, maybe that particular function or process needs some cleaning up first. So like you need to clean up the data. We may need to like retrain the team, certain things like that. And then after that, it's like, let's pilot an AI integration. So take like one of your team members or a couple of your team members and say, okay, let's test this out. Let's see how it works and then iterate from there. And the other thing we're really finding as well is continuous training is really important because as individuals get more comfortable with AI, they tend to explore and expand on it in ways that none of us even expect. And so oftentimes you'll find as you interact more with these different tools, especially now that these tools offer a lot of suggestions, you may find new uses for the tools that you never thought of. And then one of the things that also comes up is, do we build this or do we buy it? And so right now, the nice thing about AI is almost like your own personalized software in that you can go in, like, for example, with Claude, they have what they call artifacts. And with that whole concept of vibe coding, which is basically the AI can code for you, you can almost stand up your own software tool within, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how complex you want to make it. So you can build your own in-house tool, or you can buy a tool. And so the one thing to think about is from that perspective of what is kind of the risk versus the reward for implementing it, which is very similar to what we all do when we're trying to figure out, for example, are we going to implement a budget tool or are we going to implement an enterprise resource planning tool? And so that's the way to think about how do you implement these and do we want to continue to manage them? Because if you go and build yourself an AI agent, which honestly, with ChatGPT and everything, you can build within probably about an hour, it'll set it up for you. You still have to maintain it. And so that's the piece too, is do you want to maintain it yourself or do you want someone else to maintain it for you? And so those are the type of things to think about. And then the other integration considerations that come up are items around like data privacy, transparency, and AI deployment. So for example, if your company is international, the thing to keep in mind is right now the international standards are actually stricter than the US standards. And so there's a lot of tools out there to help you figure out, okay, on the spectrum of data privacy and data management, how do you go about setting that up? And those tools include, which we'll have some stuff in the slides about this, everything from NIST, which is our IT governance framework in the US. They actually built what they call a Gen AI framework, to the European Union has an AI governance framework, which is a bit more restrictive, but you can always look at adopting it. To, for example, if you're in an industry that is more focused on certain areas of that the government has deemed important, there's a group, CISA, which actually will help like do an analysis of, okay, what does your risk environment look like? So there's different ways to figure out how do you look at your whole AI governance structure as an overview. And then more specifically, each of these tools, like the large language models, they have now started to build out at your enterprise level, what does their data privacy controls look like? So from that perspective, there's a lot of ways to figure out like, what does that look like and how do you manage it? Then tactically, there's always the training. So back to like teaching your teams, the thing to keep in mind is most of your team at this point is probably testing out AI. And so whether you have it in your systems or you don't, training your team on like what to put into an AI tool goes a long way, because we all hear the stories about, okay, somebody uploaded something, but you want to teach them like, okay, here's what they can use and here's what they shouldn't use and here's what's best practice around how and when to use AI for the business versus personal use. So very similar to what you do with any kind of software tool. And so then when we think about specific to helping our teams for AI additions, we want to think about reskilling and upskilling the workforce. And so providing training is good. And so some of the simple trainings that are out there, OpenAI recently launched an AI Academy, which is a free tool. Claude has a similar one too for Anthropic. And even Perplexity has like a research tool that you can use. And then if you want specific paid tools, there are tools depending on what level the person is at the organization. So at the board level, the NASDAQ Foundation released an AI governance tool recently. And then as well as there's different tools from the National Association of Corporate Directors. Then at the executive level, there's also different tools as well. So like Harvard, for example, has a Data, Digital, and Design Institute. Right now, they have a very low cost, like here's an overview of AI, and it'll teach you AI as a whole, but it's based on the different sections as well. And then the other thing to think about with your finance team is, I know earlier we said a lot of the team is not worried about their role being disrupted by AI. The one thing to think about is as you are an AI implementation is to have those continuous conversations around how is AI being implemented in the company. Because one of the items we're finding is sometimes the team may say they're not worried about it, but then in practice they may not use it. And so certain organizations, like for example, Amazon recently led a mandate where for team members to get promoted, they need to show use of AI. Now that's kind of an extreme example, but the thing to think about is how do you promote AI adoption within the company and at what level do you want to implement it? And so I've seen organizations actually do, for example, hackathons with AI so they can figure out, okay, how do we use AI in a unique way within the team, to just teaching the team that, okay, well, we're rolling out this project, for example, we're not going to be laying off any team members. What we're going to be doing instead is we're going to be using it to help figure out how do we replace the transactional aspects of our job. So there's different ways to roll it out as you come up with it. So then I'll pause there and see if anybody has any questions, but then the other part of our presentation was we wanted to show, okay, how do you actually use these tools? And so we'll go into ChatGPT and show a use case of how effective, how you can be effective with AI for finance.
Yeah, quick question, Julianne. How do we find that academy, the AI Academy? Are those just general search? I can find a lot of them, or is it just, is there specific ones that you advocate for? Or?
There are specific ones. So Dennis, I have the links here that I'll share afterwards. But like, for example, OpenAI Academy, it's on the OpenAI website.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Julianne, going back to what you said previously about security, is what you put into ChatGPT or does that become public knowledge? Some people have told me yes, some have told me no.
It does on the base setting. If you want to turn it off, and I can show you where to turn it off, you can turn it off. So that's the nice thing about ChatGPT, is it allows you to say like, do not train the model. And then if you're using the enterprise version or the plus or pro, you can always say, don't remember any of my data. So it just depends on what level.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other additional questions? Okay, great. Well, so then the other piece, and this is the part, internet's still holding up, so we'll assume that it will for ChatGPT. But the other piece is one of the good ways to start, and I'm sure at this point everybody's tried one of the tools at this point. And so these use cases can be applied to your model of choice, by the way. And depending on which model has updated, I will say some models are better for finance than others. But one of the things we're finding as we implement and try to use GenAI is being well versed in the concept of prompt engineering, which basically is you ask the model to do something, is a good way to learn how to make it functional for finance. And so really it has a fancy name, but all you're doing is you're asking the model and you're training the model much like you trained your intern, or like I like to refer to it as my chief of staff, on how to do something. And so it's gotten much better, especially over the past, I'd say even quarter, on like asking you clarifying questions if you prompt it incorrectly. But the way to think about it is if you're good at training people, you'll be good at getting good results from the model. If you're not good at training people, you're going to find out very quickly that the model is going to give you incorrect results. And so what we're going to do here is I'll give you examples of some prompts that can help you that we've used before. And so best practices. And so there's different ways to do it. And of course, there's different acronyms. So you can always search the internet for them. But what I found with getting the best practices from GenAI to actually build you something functional within finance. And by functional, I mean, okay, it actually gives you a spreadsheet or it gives you a finance result that has limited hallucinations or that you can use and you can actually use it functionally. The thing to think about is you clearly define the objective. So you ask, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT, you ask it like, here's what I'm looking for. So like you say like, okay, you tell it to assume you're a CFO or assume you're a controller and you're looking for X result. Then you tell it to leverage domain specific terminology. So what you do is you really incorporate finance specific terminology, concepts in industry jargon. So that way you make sure, like, for example, if you're using a acronym, you try and explain it, because if you don't explain that acronym, it may misinterpret the acronym. So the other thing to do is get it in that mind frame of, okay, we are working on a finance project versus a sales project or something else. Then the other thing to do is break down complex requests. So by that, I mean, like, you can break it down in chunks, or you can do like kind of a back and forth, like having a conversation with ChatGPT. The other thing to do as well is test and iterate. So you can ask it a prompt. You can also ask the different LLMs different prompts, and you can see what works and what doesn't work. And the other thing is also to really encourage transparency. So what's nice is this actually rolled out with DeepSeek, which was the large language model out of China, and they published a paper on it. But now a lot of the LLMs at least attempt to show
You came to join the AI seminar?
Somebody's on, probably needs to mute. But what it does is now it kind of shows you its thought process, which we still don't really fully know the thought process, but at least it tells you like kind of what it's doing. But as you write your prompt, you want to help it like say like, okay, show your cite your sources or provide me with like this summary or something like that, and that'll help you get a better result. And so these are some examples of different prompts I've used before. And so we'll go in and we'll actually use these as well. But the first one is really around company setup. So this is setting up a chart of accounts. And so within this setup, what we're asking it to do is I'm asking it to assume it's a controller for a basically cell and gene therapy outpatient center. And I ask it to create an initial chart of accounts. I tell it, okay, here's what you're going to assume within that chart of accounts, so that there's going to be multiple outpatient centers. I want it standardized, and I want to include account numbering, because if you don't, it may or may not include that. And I also want it to have standard numbering schematics. Then what I add as well, because it's healthcare specific, I tell it to comply with the healthcare standards. I also ask it to apply with gap, because I have found sometimes if you don't ask it about gap, you may or may not get the right result. And then I ask it for a downloadable format. Now it will prompt you if you don't ask for that, but sometimes if you ask for it in the first try, it helps. And then I always ask it to cite the sources. And then another example we'll walk through is if we wanted to generate a financial model, you can give it data and it'll generate an Excel model. And then the second example that we'll walk through as well, one of my favorites to use is NVIDIA, because the tools, if you have more of the paid version, can actually pull data directly from the internet. So we'll go through that. And so with ChatGPT, what's nice is now they actually have, I'm not sure if anybody's used this yet, but they have a new format, and Claude has something similar too, called projects. And the projects are like you can actually group different kinds of chats. And with the chats, not only can you group the chats, but you can add universal instructions with the chat. So if I'm in ChatGPT, what I'll see on the left-hand side is I'll see like, okay, here's my projects, and I'll see all my different historical chats. And then within the project, you can have instructions. So like previously, before we started, I'd given the what I call ChatGPT Q, because I always queue it for things. But I'd given the tool like, here's what the project is. And so I said, okay, it's a CFO, it has this much experience, it's going to be adopting cutting edge technology, and that it specializes in teaching finance experts how to implement Gen AI, and that when it provides my responses, it's always going to cite its sources, it's going to give me a board level summary, and that to the best of its abilities is going to provide outcomes that can be repeated in common systems such as Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. And then if I wanted to too, if I had files, I can upload files as well.
Okay, key point on that. This is from personal experience. I have used something similar before where it gives me references, and I went back and checked the references, and they don't exist. It will seriously sometimes make up references just to add credibility. So just be aware of that.
Exactly. It's a good point, Dennis. And so it's always, what's important is always to check everything that it generates from that perspective. And the other tool too that we're finding, although this one's getting ready to be sunset in favor of the agents, and so I don't have the agents yet. They were supposed to roll out this week, but deep research helps with minimizing that work as well. So we'll go ahead and run this. So this was the one we were just talking about, the chart of accounts. And this one, by the way, it runs slightly better on Claude, but we'll run it on GPT and see what it comes up with.
Julian, one thing I've noticed, I don't know if you've noticed it also, is that if I have files more than maybe 20 or 30 pages, it doesn't work well. For example, I had an IRS PDF that was 500 pages. I had to actually print it to Microsoft Print to PDF to make it plain vanilla and break it into 30 pages or less in order for ChatGPT to read it properly.
Yes, that is correct. And sometimes you sometimes find out the hard way about that you need to break it up. And other times it'll prompt you before you actually do it, because smaller files are better. And what's nice is ChatGPT will take different types of file formats, where some of the other ones won't. So that's also a thing to keep in mind too. The other best practice I've found with documents is when you upload a document, you ask it to read it first, and then it'll read it for you, and then then say, let me know like when you're ready for the next question. And at that point, then it's helpful from that perspective. So, okay. So let's see.
Yeah, I do a scan, OCR scan in Acrobat before I give it to ChatGPT.
Yep, that's a good best practice. Yeah, and so basically based on the prompt, it went ahead and it built a chart of accounts. And so you can take this, like, we gave this to one of our team members who was first learning healthcare, but it's pretty okay. Like, I mean, you're still gonna have to adjust it and everything, but at least it got the contractual allowance. It got like, okay, here's a basic chart of accounts. Like, it has assets, current assets, cash equivalents, all of that, and it has the standard numbers. So it's something you can start with, and it's got bad debt expense and all that. And then the other thing, I think it did this, let me make sure. Yeah, and then it referenced it. Today it decided not to cite the sources or the actual links to the sources. But like, for example, when I ran this in Claude would actually give me the sources. So the other pieces, so as an update, like you see, it also asks for, if you want to add cost centers, it'll do that. Let's see. So if it doesn't give you exactly what you want, you can also have interactions with it. So like here, it said, it gave me the reference, but I can ask it for the link. References. And there we go. And so then, like Dennis was mentioning, you do want to go check the links because sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. But like this one definitely is the HF, the Healthcare Financial Management Association. But so that's nice because then you can go check and see, okay, did it give you what you wanted? And then that's when you can start your back and forth.
So Julia,
Mhm.
Julia, I have a quick question. So you have Copilot embedded in your Excel and Word. How that could be used? Like if it's already in the Excel, or should you use it in ChatGPT? Does the same prompt work with the Copilot as well?
It can. I've used it before, but well, apparently there's an update. Um, it it had Copilot, and it has not worked that well for me. I keep trying to use it, but it does not, it's not that useful is what I've been finding. So I tend to default when it comes to finance functions right now, I tend to use Perplexity first. I'll use OpenAI second, and then Copilot I'll test as it comes up because I have this preview and it'll work eventually. Because like, for example, my computer was built with Copilot, but it just doesn't work yet. My understanding is it's supposed to work, but right now in practice, I'm not seeing it work. So what I'd say, so what that tells, one of the things I'd say is I test whatever tool you're wanting to use and then figure out what works for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So that's that one. And then this one was not, this one was interesting because this one should create formulas. But what you'll see is with this, I asked it to create formulas. So let's see, please create formulas. So I'm asking it to create an Excel document that does financial data. And I just had basically data, like dummy data populated in it. And so based on this, it should create an Excel document. And one of the newer features that's being rolled out right now is instead of me telling it to create an Excel document and creating an Excel document is I can tell it, and there's you can see a video on this, I can tell it to go like pull a budget and create a budget based on NVIDIA's data or on like the San Francisco city's budget for the last 3 years, and it'll have an agent that will go run that for me. And so that's one of the new features that's coming out. So it keeps getting better, I'd say basically each day. So that's the thing to keep in mind with this, is that there's continuous improvement. And the other thing too, as well, is you can use, so I'm using the front end, this is the consumer facing piece. As you move more into like the enterprise side of the house, you can also use this as like you can use the API. So you can build this to connect like your business systems and like actually call the data. And the way you call the data on the back end is you write the prompt and then it can actually link into the API. So open APIs or OpenAI as well as Claude actually have direct connections that you can pull data in, and you can use the prompts continuously as well. And so based on that prompt I just wrote, so it wrote, okay, here's the raw data. So it pulled the data from the chat I just gave it. And then it did horizontal analysis, which you still have to check it. I asked it to use formulas, but it didn't. So I'd have to go back and ask it to rerun the formulas. But at least it attempted. And so then it did a trend analysis, and then it did a ratio analysis. And so how I've used this in the past is, like, for example, I was working on, we had a debt term sheet, and we were using the debt term sheet to figure out, okay, what are those terms, and based on how the terms look, do they make sense for us? And so, you know, when you get the term sheet, oftentimes it's in PDF, there's not clarity on like what is the internal rate of return. And I was able to use both ChatGPT and Claude to really figure out, okay, how do we build the calculation and recalculate that internal rate of return, as well as recalculate the debt repayment schedule. So you can use this for simple analyses, or you can use it for more complex analyses. But again, back to this whole human in the loop concept, we still need to check it, because when we ran the analysis, it gave us the framework, it actually gave us the formulas. But then when myself and our controller looked at it, we realized, okay, some of the numbers were quite a little bit made up. So like we had the base spreadsheet, but we still had to make sure that we went back and adjusted the actual numbers based on what the term sheet said. So it's kind of a little bit of a learning process where it helps us right now, but it may not get the answer right on the first try.
One of the other things that, yeah, we're using, if you go back to the spreadsheet, if you click on the cells, you can tell if there were just numbers that were put in there, which may be random, or if there's an algorithm behind it, which tells you that it came from another table or spreadsheet and it's running an analysis. So, you know, that particular one, it says point, if you see the box above, it just has the number 0.6206 and it has a whole string. That's probably from a random number generator. If you set it up so it's actually running a script, sometimes there's an equation behind it. That's what I always look for. See if there's an equation or just a number that's fat fingered in.
Yeah.
Well,
no,
AI generated, you know, I don't want to call it fat finger. That's what I would do, but.
Yeah, no, that's a good point too.
So, Julianne, if you find an error while you're reviewing the work, do you rerun the whole thing, or you go manually and start fixing those things yourself?
It depends on what stage it's in. So it's like, so if it was at this stage where I just ran it, I would say like, I'd ask it, well, because I call it Q, so I say like, hi Q, I found an error. Can you rerun this? Like there was one, let me see if I have the Claude one. Oh, come on. So like, for example, yesterday I was building, so Claude was building a keyboard for me. Like it's a really cute little thing that they have. Yeah, this. So they have this web app. Of course, it doesn't work. And I asked it, because when it built the keyboard, it was supposed to build the keyboard. You're supposed to be able to play the keys, and it wasn't. And it built it incorrectly the first time. And so I asked it, okay, can you rebuild it? And so it said, oh, okay, it'll rebuild it. And we got like, I think like 3 or 4 rounds in, and then I decided to say, okay, let's do a different version. And we did a version where and so I said like, okay, the piano keys are messed up. Can you please fix it? And so then I'll fix it. And so you can do that back and forth. Or like the second time I did it, I wrote within the prompt, I'm like, please do your own error checking. Although I realized I probably should have told it like basically build a minimum viable product, because it built the whole, it did so much error checking that it created another error. So those are the things to keep in mind, is like, how do you interact with it, and how do you think about, it's almost like it's literally like you're training like an intern or somebody who's doing this stuff for the first time.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then the other one, actually, we'll stick with Claude while we're on this. And then we're right at time. So actually the other one, which you guys can test on your own, because I want to be cognizant of the time too. is we can create a prompt. So I'll just show you what you can do with it really quick, and then we'll just take any more questions. But there's within ChatGPT, there's different GPTs that are created by individuals. And one I like to use, like you can search for this, there's one called Prompt Engineer. And you can do one where if you don't want to like build your own prompt, you can have it build like a prompt for you. So you can have create a prompt to support a financial analysis of any 3-year financial statements, and it will build this prompt for you. And it'll also ask you questions. So like, and then what you can do with this is, we'll say financial performance, do comprehensive. So it'll ask you questions to clarify now. Which is nice because that's a newer feature within ChatGPT where it'll ask you for clarifying questions. And then, so this is kind of a good shortcut if you don't really, if you want to learn, number one, how to do prompts, or number two, you want to clean up your prompt. That'll actually help you. And then once you do that, then you can take this prompt with back within ChatGPT and then have it run the prompt for you. Yeah. So we're at time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's day. Does anybody have any additional questions? Or one of the things we're also going to do, actually, I'll share one more time, is we'll share our slide deck afterwards, but we'll give you too as well information on takeaways, of course, but different productivity tools you can use, or some of the different trainings we've referenced here, as well as different places you can find courses to learn about more information or things like that as well. As well as, like I mentioned, as I was talking about that ChatGPT, the new agent, or the Perplexity Finance dashboard I was talking about as well, where you can pull up basically any public company stock and analyst sentiment as well too.
Well, if I could just quick jump in. Thank you, Julianne, for a great presentation. I'm curious how your experience has been working with auditors and their response to use of AI in your day-to-day finance function and generation of financial statements. And then lastly, do you have any perspectives on how auditors are using AI in the course of an audit? Thanks.
That's a great question. They've been open to it as long as they can understand how we're using it. Because I had one auditor where a lot of mine are dealing with AI within the product already. So they have to get comfortable with how we use it and how we get comfortable with it. So that's their first step for how they audit it. And then how they're using it, actually, because we just had EY presented this to our one of our audit committees last week. They're very pro AI, I'd almost say, a lot of them, because what they're doing right now is they're using AI within their audit approach. And so it's been an interesting shift, which I didn't see even as recently as 6 months ago. But now it's how they use it is they use it really around risk management and testing. So you see it a lot with, okay, they're higher risk accounts. You see it with like journal entries, and you see it really figure out where to focus the testing. So like what type of questions they're asking and how they're going to drive it, how they're going to drive, like a lot of my companies focus on revenue recognition, or going concern tends to be a big risk. So you'll see it come up a lot with like questions around unusual transactions within the revenue area.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. You know, that question about demand. So the question is demand for mid-senior finance career professionals to move into the AI implementation. It's still early, and I'd say it's almost like a part of the job. So what we're starting to see is we are starting to see full roles posted out, like actually like for like AI transformation. It's an interesting role where it's what we find is best practice is where you take an individual who understands this and understands your organization and have them similar to what you do with like ERP, with the enterprise resource planning, is you have them shift into that role. So it becomes almost a project role, or it becomes more of an organizational role, but we are starting to see it's not necessarily a full-time job at this point, but what we're starting to see more is some companies are referring to themselves, like for example, as full AI native, where they're seeing like they run their whole company with what they call AI agents, which are almost like bots at this point. But then with finance in particular, where we're seeing it right now is we're seeing it more of a blend of, we have some individuals who are really forward thinking in AI adoption, and then they help train the rest of the organization. And demand's very high, I'd say, for those individuals who have that skill set.